Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Newsroom Pub. I'm Jim Nelson, past president of the Press Club with the Milwaukee Sentinel. Welcome for those of you who have never been to the Newsroom Pub. Welcome to the open to the public facility that we are so proud to be a part of here. We've been in this location for about 20 years, and there's Milwaukee journalism and cultural history on all these walls around here. Take a minute, look around tonight. Take a minute, come back at another time. This is the first time we've had an event like this, a Newsmaker at night here, and it's thanks to Bruce Harrison, a multimedia journalist with today's TM4, who put this together. And Bruce will moderate the discussion tonight on safety and sensitivity in crime coverage. Before we get started, I'd like to give special thanks to the FPC Endowment, that's the Milwaukee Press Club Endowment. This is a free event. It was underwritten by the Endowment, which is the independent charitable affiliate of the Milwaukee Press Club. The Endowment funds scholarships, grants, and that advance excellence in journalism. For more information or to request grants and make donations, go to mpcendowment.org. And I would be remiss if I didn't give yet another reminder that today is Giving Tuesday. So you can make a tax-deductible contribution to the endowment on Giving Tuesday. I'd also like to thank our event sponsors. Our presenting sponsor is Spectrum News One. Our supporting sponsor is We Energies. We'd also like to thank our event partner, WisPolitics.com. WisPolitics is partnered with us for this event and a whole bunch of other events. It's really worked out nicely with them, and we're very appreciative for that partnership. Our Newsmaker series is also sponsored by the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, the Wisconsin Academy of Global Education and Training, 1125 and PAPS, the Milwaukee Police Association, the Firm Consulting, Medical College of Wisconsin, and Spectrum. I'd like to take the time now to welcome our panel this morning, or this afternoon. See, I still think it's noon hour at Newsmaker lunch. From the Milwaukee Sentinel, Ashley Lutheran. From Fox 6 News, Amanda St. Hilaire.
Hilaire. Yeah. Good job.
See, I told you. At least I didn't say that. From today's TMJ4 News, Andrew Triplett. And from WISN 12 News, Kent Wainscott. So I'll turn things over to Bruce Harrison, and once again, thank you for being here, and thank you, Bruce, for putting this together.
We're going to try and do things a little differently compared to some previous events. I'm going to share out here so I can see the panel. And the goal here tonight is to have an open, dynamic conversation about a big part of news coverage in Milwaukee and southeast Wisconsin, and that's covering crime, violent crime. And I think too often we stop short of reflecting on the practices and approaches to how we do it. And I think tonight maybe is an opportunity to discuss some of those things, both for the journalists in the room, to walk away with some more tips, perhaps, confidence, to approach the job, as well as community members who come out here tonight to maybe see how we do this job, and to hear from them as well, perhaps to improve it. So with that, I'm going to turn to the panel. I'm going to start pretty broad before we get into the details of the trenches with Trip. We've been reporting the market for decades. I want to ask Ashley first, who's been covering crime at the Sentinel since 2013, doing some deeper work on gun violence among youth. Just to step back and not as a reporter, but as a news consumer, what do you think about crime coverage in the Milwaukee?
It is on. Well, that's a really interesting question, because I often don't take time to reflect on the other news coverage that I'm seeing in that way. I think across our media market, crime coverage of public safety is the number one thing that we are covering, in large part because our community is telling us it is something they care deeply about. But I do think many journalists would, and people probably on this panel would agree that there's been a long history of covering crime in a way that may further stigmatize communities and not amplifying the voices of those who are most affected, people who have been victimized, and not looking at why the systemic issues that are causing crime and what we're seeing. We're seeing an outcome here. And so I know at the Journal-Sentinel, we've taken a lot of steps to try to change how we cover crime and make sure it's more framed within public safety. We have a lot of people dedicated to looking at solutions and what people are doing in their neighborhoods to try to prevent crime. But, like everyone, we still fall short. And I think there's just, in particular, probably in the past 5 years, there's been a real reimagining of what crime coverage could be in a lot of different places, not just Milwaukee.
Thanks. Andrew, in regards to what Ashley said, the market quite a bit longer, looking back a bit, would you say, as a news consumer, how would you say that coverage has changed as a consumer, not as a reporter?
Well, thanks for inviting me first. I've been in this market 47 years. Well, 42, I should say. One thing has never changed. Crime has never changed. Everybody has worked on crime coverage, to cover the event. Then, it's how you look at crime. One, a statistic, or, are they solving the crimes? So, as a consumer, I take it all in. I've seen crime. Some of the biggest crimes in this country occurred here in Milwaukee over the last 3-4 decades. And we all know the names, the Dahmer stories. There were industrial accident stories. But going back to crime is never going to go anywhere. It's been here. The only thing that's changed is the people who's covered it. And I think that it changes because the people who cover it are different. They come from different perspectives, and they add to it how they perceive it and how they need to respond to it. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you are. Just a little bit deeper. When you said the people operate, are you seeing changes in the market today from a consumer standpoint about what you read and how does it feel about it?
Well, yeah, because now it's all about how you gather your information, what's your experience level for information gathering, and who are you writing it for? Who are you writing it to? That changes because in the 70s when I came aboard, that was a different group. They were the tenure, they were there longer. So they knew their community in another way that today, you may not have that grasp because you constantly have to learn the administrations and the process of, how you have to cover crime. But I think that it's more people watching it, more people are consuming it because we have more devices to take you there. Digital, TV, radio. I still think it's the same crime. I'm just thinking you're hearing more about it because there's so many more avenues to tell you about it.
And before we move on to some of the specific safety and sensitivity issues I want to touch on, I did want to go to Ken on that note from Andrew. What do you think about that? We're seeing more of it, and also to Andrew's point that maybe people aren't sticking around as long or more in the market. What would you say the impact of that is?
I have a biased opinion, but I think institutional memory is an important thing in a newsroom. I think having that kind of experience and longevity is something that allows a news operation to help put things in perspective for a community. Things that are and continue to be important. You mentioned that crime coverage gets so much attention because people say that that's something that matters to them. They worry about, public safety is a major concern. The challenge, I think, particularly in broadcast, is that the stories are competing against themselves. Ashley's right. The focus needs to be on the systemic causes. The focus needs to be on what's being done to address the problems. But you have limited time. A newscast is only so many minutes long. You report on the crime. How much time do you devote to solutions? How much time do you devote to underlying causes? How much of a focus is there, and how much will your audience stick around for? Those are all of the things that some of the decision makers are dealing with on a daily basis. I think those are critical points that we need to look at, but it's something I know that every news operation in the city struggles with.
Nature of the beast and respect. Man, we got to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I worked with an anchor once who had a post-it up by her desk, and it was one question, and it was, are we serving the community or are we extracting from it? And I think there's been a bigger move across the country to better serve the community, when in the past, and if we're being honest, in the present, some of the coverage, it can be, and it is extracting. And so there is more of a focus, I think, amongst all the outlets here that I've seen, and it's palpable, of making it so it's not just numbers-based or breaking news-based, but more people-based. I think where we could stand to do better, it's one of the easiest things and one of the hardest things, is the language that we use. And I'm going to pick on TV here for a bit because that's what I know, but a lot, you turn on the TV and you hear residents, authorities, officials, you hear passive voice, you hear the suspect fled on foot, the man was apprehended, the cliches, it was tragic, senseless crime as opposed to sensible, I guess, right? So when we do that, I think we're not helping people understand what's happening. And then sometimes we're not understanding what's happening. We're not realizing the holes in our own story because we're repeating the cop talk and the jargon. And part of that is, a factor of time because people are turning stories very quickly. But one of the easiest and one of the hardest things, I think, that is the next step is making sure we're really communicating what actually happened and not treating police reports as fact sheets. That's the biggest challenge in the day-to-day on a tight turn.
Sure, tell me stories about people and avoiding that jargon. It's not easy, it comes with experience. I think that opening is kind of led me into a natural segue where I want to focus on sensitivity now. We can move on to safety later. How many reporters in the audience have sat in the front of the car or on the panel and said, I don't want to knock on that next door. I don't want to extract more information out of people who probably don't want to tell it. Even Fred.
Yeah. Sure. You won't do.
Fred, obviously, what's your name?
That's short for triplets, so explain that so they don't think I'm.
Yeah, everyone knows this trip to the state.
Yeah, sure.
He was retired last week. I'm proud of him. Triplets and people who stick around. Ken Wainscott, who's been on the beat since '88. WIS and CI. It's great when people think.
Thanks for throwing that.
I knew the old Gipper too. Trip.
Yes.
How do you overcome that moment? And then move beyond that. But
You don't. You do it. I mean, because that's your job, to go and gather and extract news. That's your job, not to be a social worker, not to be anything else. You need to know, is this on? Check.
I think it was before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it on now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm saying you don't. I mean, you have a job. Your job is to go and gather the news. You have so much time to do what you have to do. You have rules, you have structure, and you have to take that leap every day. I gotta go talk on this door because it's more likely the proximity of people who live here would know possibly what's going on. I hated to do it, but I've done it over 1,000 times. And I'm glad I did it, because if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't go and find out, you don't know, and you're now just being suspicious about what you're talking about. Now, put the facts out.
Sure. Sometimes you rise to the occasion to do the job. Ken's been doing it in this market for a while. Like I said, in a question I flagged earlier, can you tell us a story about an experience and maybe you felt like you went too far? Somebody, frankly, just didn't want to be bothered, but your job is to put a story together.
Yeah, I actually was thinking about that because you mentioned that earlier. I can't honestly think of a situation where I felt as though I went too far or that I pressured someone too hard. The hard part is that we all have empathy, right? I mean, you're talking to somebody on their worst day very often, and you can feel for them. And I don't know. I mean, I've always found that if you express the empathy, if you strike up a conversation, if you make them understand that you've got a job to do, and sometimes yes, you get the door slammed in your face, but if you have that kind of personal connection with the individual that you're dealing with, and I'm talking specifically about people who are crime victims or family members or something like that, people who obviously I'm the last person that they want to see or talk to, but if you can make that connection with them, sometimes they're willing to open up. And we see it more now in this time of social media, where people are willing, for someone old school like me, I always look at it and wonder, why would somebody want to share that? Why do you feel as though you need to share that story or those feelings? But I think people do want to share. I think it's in their nature that if they feel comfortable, if they feel as though they can trust somebody, they are willing to share. And so, yeah, no, I to be honest with you, I really don't recall a time where I felt terribly uncomfortable walking away, feeling as though I pressured somebody into doing or saying something that they didn't want to. But it's difficult. It's challenging to face somebody down when they're going through something that's very emotional.
Sure. And I imagine there are situations where people don't want to talk. We'll get to that. I wanted to ask Amanda, not only as an investigative reporter, but as a news, I really do want to use this microphone. As a news content manager, what situations have you encountered working with reporters who say this isn't going to pan out? Are we in those managerial roles pushing to get that sound, regardless of the impact of the person who may not want to speak? Or are we balancing a judgment?
So I think it's a combination of a few things. So as a manager and as a reporter, going into everything, we need to know the why. So we need to know why we're knocking on that door, what we're hoping to get out of it, in part so we can explain it to people, which can be one of the most effective ways to convince someone to talk to you, is the why. If it's just that's because we think the competition's going to do, that's probably not a good enough reason. It has to serve the story. I think another part of it is making sure that our staff and that we ourselves are educated in trauma-informed journalism. And there's a lot more information about that now, because you're right, it is our job, but we can do it in a way where we're inflicting as little harm as possible. And some of the things are things people do instinctively, some of them aren't. Things like along the way as you're talking to someone, giving them out, which counterintuitively can actually help convince someone to talk to you. It's stopping and checking in with someone. It's not asking them to go into extensive description, reliving something that was traumatic, especially if we already know those details. Don't make them go back over it again. Instead, have them describe different things. And it's doing those check-ins, by the way, with ourselves, because we see a lot of stuff. And in the past, I think cultures and newsrooms were very different, where we would internalize things in different ways and not have those outlets. So what I look at when I'm wearing my managerial hat is, how am I being proactive and signaling to reporters why this is an important part of their job, but also that I trust them and I believe them when they tell me something. There are times where you have to gently push. You know, are you feeling uncomfortable because there's data to show that your safety could be at risk? And I know we'll get into safety in a little bit, or are you uncomfortable with the knowledge that one of the things that informs your gut feeling is bias? Are you uncomfortable because you're walking into a neighborhood where people don't look like you? And those are kinds of the questions we have to ask reporters in a way that can push them, but also help them know they're supported as they go about their trauma-informed reporting.
Thanks for that. Ashley, what about?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say we have to ask, because, and this is something I work with a lot of our interns and early career reporters too, and there is an understandable reluctance, like, you're human. Being a journalist in some ways is doing everything your parents kind of taught you not to do, being in other people's business, going out, knocking on doors of people you don't know, and you have to think, like Amanda said, like, the why of your doing it is really important, but you have to make the ask, because you never know what that person has to say, and you should be thoughtful and respectful about how you do it and respect their answer. If they say no, I often ask, like, can I leave my card in case you change your mind? And they might still say no, but more often than not, they take it, and I will hear from people 3-6 months later. You just don't know if you don't ask. And I think I have so much respect for my broadcast colleagues, because you all also need people to talk on camera, and that is a really big hurdle as well, I imagine. And so I'm sure we'll talk more about that too, but it can be intimidating to have the camera, I'm sure, on people. And for me, it's a little bit, even if I have a photojournalist colleague with me, it is a little bit, I think, less intimidating than someone with a large camera, perhaps.
Before we move on, I just wanted to look out and ask, has anyone ever been in a situation, whether you were a reporter or someone in the community, whether you were the person interviewed or saw something where you said, that shouldn't have been on there, or that shouldn't have been there? Has anyone felt that way? Right in the front. How should reporters respond to Trip, let's say,
Well,
it comes back into the newsroom. How do you respond? How do you keep that on the air? How do you keep that?
I mean, nobody's perfect. We all know that. And again, how much time do you have? Let's create a scenario. It's a 12 noon hit. I got there at 10 o'clock or 10:30. Is this thing going off here? Okay. Hello. Okay. So it's all dynamics. I mean, if I show up and Trip, there's a shooting, you just happen to be there, and, I don't know what the shooting is going to turn into. It could be the biggest story of the day. It could be a light story. That's all how you look at it. But again, if you are a newspaper person, you got a little different advantage, because you can talk to them without the intimidation. I have a big camera with me all the time. That's not going to go over too great. Most people see a camera and say, no. They see Wayne and say, oh, I'll talk to Wayne, because Wayne doesn't carry a camera, right? Well, yeah, right. Maybe for a week, so. But it is your manner. I mean, it's your manner of how you relate to people and how you approach people. You do have to talk to people at a very, very tough time. And I found sometimes talking to people, they look and go, I'm glad I talked to you. And I'm sorry that I have to be here under such circumstances, but you only have so much time. You do want the story. There is pressure on you. Your manager just doesn't want a story. They want the best story, and it continues on. That's just the way it is. It's just like a change. But I think his manner today is different. You know, how you talk to people, what you know about people, what you know, period, you know, will help you in that exercise of getting an interview. There's sometimes we didn't get the interview, and look to my right, he's got the interview. I mean,
I didn't have an opportunity.
not a lot, but enough to say, you know, you don't get them all.
Sure.
Bruce, can I just jump in on that specific topic that you mentioned? You know, people seeing things that hit them wrong, right? Like that never should have been printed, that never should have been on air. I know something that we are, at the Journal-Sentinel, we are constantly trying to do is hit the brakes for a second and think about why we're including this detail, why we're telling this story. We have some dedicated communication channels like our internal Slack team where we talk about those things and talk about framing and headlines, and particularly when it comes to covering crime and public safety, it's those details, right? Do you really have to say X, Y, or Z, or can you get the point across with this? You know, is it gratuitous? And I always try to think of either way, if whatever the story is, how would I answer a reader who says, why did you include that, or why didn't you include that? And if I can answer that in a way that I feel confident and ethical about and have talked to my editors about, then I go with that decision.
At a certain point, when the attractions perhaps just erode the journalistic principles of the trying to approach on a daily basis, but there can be a balance acting. Ken, I wanted to go to you, moving on a little bit here. I won't mention how long you've been in the market then. But
No, that's fine. Just don't talk about how young you are.
You're a white man. You've been reporting communities of color for decades. How do you reflect on that, and how do you approach that in a way that you feel is equitable and just to people who aren't experiencing necessarily real life?
I have, does this work?
In the context of covering crime. Could be
Yeah.
turn it off.
Is it on?
I think it is. You know, honestly, it's a question that I have found myself asking myself often over the years. And I've never felt uncomfortable. I've never felt as though I was coming in as an outsider, but I also am well aware that I don't have the same perspective, right? I mean, it's obvious that I don't. And I go in with that knowledge. I mean, I go in with the knowledge that I am in a setting or dealing with people who don't have the same background, who don't have the same upbringing, who don't come at this story from the same perspective that I do. And I think approaching it that way, accepting, you know, my flaws, my lack of knowledge or experience in a particular setting, makes it actually easier for me to kind of reach out for understanding, for people to educate me as I'm approaching a story. I think the worst thing I could possibly do in a setting like that is to go in and presume to know what somebody else is feeling or what they've experienced. And I think if you go in and understand your own limitations, it makes it easier to communicate with the people that you're dealing with.
to Ashley. You spent 2 years on collaboration covering youth gun violence. I don't know if you agree or disagree with Kent, but let's speak to going into a place without the same perspective, and why is it still a value to the news market, to the user, for all races?
I agree a lot with what Ken said, and I think it's like he said, it's about being aware of all the different. Honestly, there are a lot of different power imbalances, right? You're a journalist coming in, you're working for an institution, so that's a power balance. You look at things like race and gender and other things like that. That all informs how you're approaching a story. But for me, it's really about forming relationships with people, because you gain trust by telling stories accurately, fairly, sensitively, and it takes time. And so Kent has, you've been doing this work for such a long time, but you've done wonderful work and people respect that. Same with you, Trip. And I hope that we've all been able to do that because we've been here a while, but it's hard. And I also think it's really difficult because in a lot of places, crime coverage goes to the newest reporter in a way. And in some ways, it really should go to your most experienced reporter because you're dealing with such high stakes coverage in a lot of ways. And it informs so much of the community's understanding about itself. So I'm sorry, I'm probably rambling a little bit, but my philosophy has always been to be humble, go in to learn and be upfront with people, try to be trauma informed, because I think that is huge. Talking to people about what you hope to do with the story. I always tell people I don't want you to be surprised by what you read in the paper. And if people are not public officials, if they are sort of, particularly if they're a crime victim, I'm going to talk through a story with them. I'm going to talk through, what they're going to see, possibly, what the other side, if there is a other side, will be saying, and just try to, again, they might not like it. If they have problems with details that I'm including, I talk about why I included them. We have a conversation. But I think it's about making sure people do feel agency, because it is their story in a lot of ways. It is.
If I could build on that too, I think a lot of times I wonder if crime is the right name for the beat or the right beat, because part of how you build that up is not just parachuting in for the bad stuff. And especially as a beat reporter, I think it was easier for me to find ways to not do that. And at first when I switched over into investigative, it's like, okay, well, my job isn't to do stories on puppies and bunnies, so how am I going to do that? But through the years, it became clear that, there are positive aspects to those stories. I did a story once about a group of parents. There was a coach accused of stealing their fundraiser money. That was just devastating for that community. And for them, that was a positive story because they got answers and they got solutions. So I think there's still a way to make sure you're not just parachuting in for the bad stuff. And I think one thing we have to ask ourselves too when we're looking at our staffing, when we have the ability to, is to ask, is this the right person to tell that story? Are we looking at it via the right framing? But then also, is crime the right name for that beat? Because then by default, we have one person who we're sending in for what we think of as the same stereotypical thing. So part of that reimagining, I think that we were all talking about, that's been happening with this coverage is, maybe we need to expand the definition of what this is and how we look at it. And additionally, it's also why I think newsrooms are at a huge, not just humane disadvantage, but strategic disadvantage if they don't value diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff. Because even if you have a reporter walking into a community where, you are talking to people who don't have your experience, or you're walking in with a set of privilege other people don't have, if you have people in management, if you have peers, if you have other people who have walked in different experiences, you're that much more informed, and your newsroom can be that much more informed in its coverage.
Sure, thanks. So the intentionality of it all has to be very honed in on. Two takeaways there, are we parachuting too much? Are we just covering the map? How else can we expand on that story beyond that specific crime that took place? Who else lives on that block? Who else is impacted by this? And there are lives that we're overlooking just because of the focus on one negative. I wanted to move on to safety a bit before we jump to maybe some questions. We're looking right along. Start with Cal Trip.
Safety. Okay.
We talked a bit before this. I mean, do you have a story you want to share, or you feel maybe you overstepped your bounds, put yourself in harm's way, and perhaps maybe other people as well?
Okay. Is it on? Yeah. Okay. I've been in a lot of situations, a multitude of situations, be it foreign, be it local, be it statewide. We're talking about crime, but crime is everywhere. If it's a crime in Madison, if it's a crime in the North Woods, if it's a crime, my crime experience came from the city of Milwaukee and those boundaries, but sometimes I find myself in situations, matter of fact, most of the time, when I'm out of my environment. I'm in strange places. I don't know nothing about where I am, but I'm going to find out as soon as I get here and you comfortably go approach. But I've been in hectic situations, as now we know, we address it as mentally ill. I was drawn upon with a weapon. I've had experiences where I was shot at. Yikes. Did I do anything to provoke that? I don't know. This one guy thought I was taking his picture as he was walking down the street. I'm aiming this way. He's walking this way. But he thinks I'm taking his picture. So when he gets to me, he says, I don't want my picture taken. I don't argue. I go, that's not a problem. I don't have your picture and I won't be taken. Yes, you did. I mean, the confrontation comes. And what you learn is how to de-escalate. Because you can find yourself in that situation. And it's not about arguing with somebody that they're wrong or right. It's how do I stop you from doing something that, I don't want to happen. I think today, telling stories, again, it's manner. I mean, but you don't have to be doing anything and you can just be just wrong. So you really got to know how to talk yourself out of a situation because you're going to face it.
Sure, de-escalation is key. As a manager. Are there anything you tell reporters, red flags to look out for? Just avoid a situation to begin with.
So I suspect that one of the reasons I got asked to be on this panel was because recently a few newsrooms had a conversation with MPD about safety, and one of the members of law enforcement said something like, well, you guys have to be aware of your surroundings. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think my response was, if I get one more person telling me to be aware of my surroundings, I might throw up. Because it is such a general statement that actually puts the onus on the field crews and doesn't actually give people concrete advice about what to do. So I see my role as a manager as being proactive and not just waiting for someone to say, I don't feel safe. Because let's be real, especially in the environments a lot of us came up through, saying I don't feel safe sometimes didn't feel like an option. And sometimes actually that's harder for the less experienced people because they're trying so hard to prove themselves. They don't want to say, or sometimes you're not experienced enough to know you should be scared, right? So I see my role as being proactive, not just in checking in and how are you feeling, but okay, where are you going? What do we know about the situation you're walking into? We have to know exactly where you are. If you're going to be doing a live hit, do we need to send another person to watch the area? Because the reporter's looking at the camera, the photographer's looking at the reporter, and do we need another set of eyes there? And then it's asking ourselves too, what's the value that we get out of this for the viewer and for the newsroom? And then what's the risk? And how do those compare? So one thing we're having a big conversation about at our station is our live hits and being more intentional about how and where we go live. It used to be everything was live. And that was when it was like impressive to be live. And even, 10 years ago, it was impressive to be live. Well, now it's social media, everybody's live. And if you're standing in front of an empty building, and by the way, sometimes even we had something happen outside of MPD District 1. You're not always safe where you think you're safe. Are we really giving people that much more value in that live hit? And then what's the risk to the field crew? I was just talking about that with Jill Geisler today, former Fox 6 News director. And she said the question they always asked was, what's the value to the viewer? What's the value to the newsroom? And you've got to ask both. Because if you're asking what's the value to the newsroom only, we're only doing what's convenient for us, and that's not good. And if you're only asking what's your value to the viewer, you are missing out on protecting your people. And that's a really important part of this job too, especially as the industry loses good journalists who have been doing that for a long time. So I see it as being proactive about dismantling some of those systems. And then if someone does go through something, instead of waiting for them to say, I think I need to take the day tomorrow, calling and saying, I am encouraging you to take tomorrow off. You just had someone just pulled a gun out on you. That was really scary. I strongly recommend you take tomorrow, because sometimes people need someone in authority to almost give permission because they don't want to ask.
Sure, yeah. Speaking of for yourself, at least in our region, I believe I'm hearing about it, that's more acceptable. Again, I wanted to ask, how have you seen approaches to safety change in the newsroom over the years? And has that made your job harder or easier?
I think it's made the job easier just for that reason, that reporters, that crews in general are more comfortable in saying, this is not for me. This is not a safe environment. I don't feel comfortable doing a live shot for a late newscast in an area where maybe it's there's been a shooting and there's still an investigation going on, and there's a lot of emotion in the neighborhood. Cameras and lights can heighten that emotion. Certainly, you don't want to escalate a situation, and so it's best to back away. And I think managers, for the most part, are more receptive, certainly than they used to be, to crews saying, maybe we need to rethink this, or go live from somewhere else, another location that makes sense, or something like that. I would also note that sometimes it's where you least expect it, right? I mean, you can't predict what's going to happen, or how somebody's going to react to you or to your camera. I've been mobbed in a crowd at Summerfest. I have been doing a live shot on what I thought was just a street near the Hank Aaron Trail when some kids started throwing rocks at us. When I was doing a lot of consumer reporting back in the day, I confronted a contractor who was been accused of ripping people off, and he turned and grabbed me and started to tackle and swing at me. And fortunately for me, I think realized that he was doing something he shouldn't be doing, and he was doing it on camera, and so he backed off. But again, these things can happen when you least expect it, and I think you're right about de-escalation. You have to understand that you need to find a way to remove that energy from that situation. And So yeah, in answer to your question, yeah, I do think it has changed a lot, and it's changed because the mindset within the newsroom, particularly among managers, the sensitivity to what the crews on the street are experiencing has changed over time.
Sure. Before we move on to some questions, I guess Ashley on that note, do you think that's protecting both the news crews, the reporters, as well as perhaps those communities by having a greater awareness of the need to de-escalate and maybe just pull back from the story?
So again, I have so much respect for the work that you all do, because having a camera, having the lights can make you a target, can escalate that situation, even if you're not doing anything other than reporting the news that happened there. So I think these are really important conversations to have. I feel fortunate. There have been very, very few times in my career where I've ever actually felt unsafe. But I think thinking about safety in newsrooms generally has gotten I don't know, it's more of a conversation, I think, than when I started working in newsrooms like 14 years ago. It's certainly more of a concern and more of a priority. And I did want to ask, I mean, I understand like sometimes you all use private security, right?
Yeah.
Could you explain a little bit, I mean, just for me, I'm curious how you all decide to use that and kind of what the role of those private security folks are?
We'll yield to the manager.
So it really is a case-by-case scenario. We try not to, because sometimes walking in with an additional person can escalate the situation. And really, again, asking the why, right? What is the purpose? And making sure that we're doing so in a way that is not informed by bias. So, I mean, some things, if it's like, I know that when everything was happening in Kenosha, and I wasn't a manager at this point, but there were certain cases when the decision was made to send security out, and there were times when that didn't happen. But we're pretty selective in when we do that. And again, it's kind of, what do we think we're going to get out of that move? Sometimes you can get that much more of a benefit just by having an additional person who isn't security, just to be an additional set of eyes, because that's going to do the job that it needs to do.
Great. Any good thoughts on that?
Well, again, I mean, I think the managers are aware of, and they say all the time, safety first, and make a great decision. But Kenosha, brought up Kenosha. We had vehicles damaged. We had people shot at the cars. That's what aligned us to have security and armed security. I mean, there were situations that you can't predict. You don't know. It's better safe than sorry. I mean, I don't know how that decision. I feel more secure when I know there's somebody watching my back, and I'm in a situation, and I want a security person, a trained person that knows what to do, because I don't want them to do the wrong thing and be a macho person or something and walk in the crowd and, like you said earlier, escalate the situation. But I think common sense, though, I mean, we always begin with that and end with that. Again, manner, that helps. But you're a target. People want to be on TV. People want to be in the media. You can't stop. They gravitate
towards the camera crew, and maybe now more than ever, we're seeing more threats and attacks on media's trust and faith, and media's been undermined.
Yeah.
Well, I went a little longer than I planned before turning over the audience, but you guys have some great things to say. I did want to open it up to the crowd now. In terms of sensitivity and covering different crimes in communities. Anybody had a question for any of our panelists? All right.
For Ashley.
Would you like me to grab my mic?
You guys can hear me good.
I can hear you.
I can hear you. So, Ashley, when the survivor victim that you initially attempted to get their reviews sent out and came back to you 3 or 6 months later, did you write their story?
Yeah, I did. And, it's about being a little creative, but I do feel a responsibility when people want to share their story to tell it. And sometimes I might not have the time right at that moment, but we'll talk. We'll have a conversation about it.
Anyone else? Maybe I can frame it in a way. Go ahead.
Okay, I know there's been a lot of conversation about the phrase like police say. We use a lot on the news that say police claim, police believe, using that. How would y'all recommend as a reporter or an anchor not just taking police for what they say when sometimes that's all you have for them?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
So I don't have a problem with saying police say this. I think sometimes it's also pointing out what we don't know or what they're not saying. So recently, Milwaukee police did one of their community briefings, and they released the footage that they released. So we made sure to point out it was edited footage. So that's one way to kind of tell people, hey, you're just getting one perspective on the story. The part that they left out was a sizable part, and it was someone who police shot. And by the way, saying police shot him instead of saying the guy was shot, which is something I see a lot. The active voice can add some accountability. The guy police shot, he's having a full-on conversation with police, and then police are saying, well, later he died at the hospital. And you kind of watch the video and you go, wait, what happened? This was a really tight turn. So we made sure to say, police did not say what happened between this time and that time. We've asked them this question and that question. Process reporting and pointing out what they left out adds a layer of accountability, but also gives you the next natural follow-up for your story. It's like, hey, here are 9 questions I have for you about this thing you just released. And so it ends up serving you in the long run. So I don't have a problem with saying, police say this happened, as long as we're also pointing out what they did not say and the parts of the story that maybe don't make sense.
Sure, yeah, I don't think there's enough of that. I think by default, we're just willing to say what authorities say because the authorities won't. They're humans and flaws. We don't have all information, so that's a great point. Right here.
Yeah, I was struck, I think it might have been you, Nan. You said something about being careful not to extract from them. Can you say a little more about that? Because I'm just curious, that must be a fine line, but also be sensitive to the victim. And what's going on with the extract?
Yeah, so I think it's coming back to the why we're doing the story, because there's a part of you during the day that has to set aside how you personally feel in order to continue about and do your story. Otherwise, you would be crippled by all the feelings of everything that's going on. But in that setting aside, I think there's a reaction sometimes when something happens where it's, oh, that's amazing video and that's great sound. And it's okay to acknowledge that that is powerful video or that is powerful sound. But in getting caught up of the excitement, oh, we've got to get there and we've got to get, Channel 12 has that, or Channel 6 has that, or Channel 4 has that. So that means we have to get that. In doing that and in the competition or seeing it as more of a race, you can lose some of that humanity. So to me, and for everyone, it's going to look different. It's stopping and checking yourself and remembering the why. So I can still go in and ask this person for an interview, but I'm going to approach it in a different way if I'm thinking about how the story benefits the community instead of what can I get from this? What can we get from this? Instead, how can we use this story to help people understand something? And then making sure that we're showing up not just for the bad stuff.
And how much, I just wonder, are you able to focus in on being sensitive to the person that's been victimized?
So with
parents, family.
Yeah, so, and it's funny, before I became a parent, I think I thought I was sensitive to parents when something happened, and then I became a parent and realized, oh, I didn't know anything. So, part of it is lived experience, and there are certain lived experiences I have and certain lived experiences I will never have. With investigative reporting, I have the luxury of time. So I can sit there, if I am talking to a victim, I can sit there for a lot longer. I'm not turning it for the 5 o'clock news. So the way I approach that is going to be different than if I'm doing something on the daily. But I think there are still ways to make sure people know the full implications of what they're about to tell us. Some people don't want to go on camera, and there are times when that means I have to walk away from an interview if they won't go on camera. And it's explaining to them, listen, I don't want people to doubt your credibility. I want them to know you're confident in what you're saying. I don't want to raise more questions than provide answers. And in explaining the why, you can have that empathy and do that. But it's going to look a little different on something I'm working on long term versus something that's turning for the news that night. But that doesn't mean you can't bring that in while still doing your job.
Yeah, and that's one I've heard here several times, because time constraints will make a difference.
I'm curious, how do you respond to viewers or readers who say, I don't watch the news or I don't read the news because it's too negative? As a journalist, how do we respond to that in a way that maybe gets them to give us a chance again?
Well, more than ever right now. How do we stay in business? Yeah.
How do we stay in business is the bottom line, right? We hear it all the time, right? I mean, it's the challenge of addressing what people tell you that they want or what they don't want, and seeing how they respond to what's on the air. I don't watch the news because it's too negative or there's too much crime coverage. Doesn't necessarily hold true when you look at the number. They'll say that. I feel that way too. Personally, as a news viewer, yeah, I don't want to watch crime stories. If I had my choice, I don't want to hear about all of the terrible things that are happening in a community. But you know what? I'm a news viewer and I watch the news and I read the paper and I see those stories, and it's important that I do. And we need to know what's happening in our communities, and that's why we all do what we do. And I think that for the most part, it's a criticism of the coverage that maybe we don't like to look in the mirror and see that negative reflection, and it makes us uncomfortable, and we express that. But at the same time, I think many of the people who say that really do watch the news. Maybe they watch a different brand of news. Maybe they read a different paper. Maybe they watch PBS as opposed to a local newscast because they're more comfortable with that. But no, I think you can't respond to that. I think you can't react to that. I think you can't let that determine what it is you're trying to do and providing a community service in serving the public on a daily basis and covering the stories that are important to a community. We all have our own perspective. We all have our own tastes in what we watch or what we consume in terms of news. But I think it's important that we have journalists who are out there doing that work on a daily basis. And if people tell us, I don't like that, I'm uncomfortable with that, I think that's less a reflection on what we're doing than it is perhaps on just maybe their feelings about the environment they're in or their community.
I think it's also how we frame it. So it's I think that holding elected leaders accountable for the promises they make around public safety is a positive thing, right? I think uncovering corruption is a positive thing. So the quote unquote negative stories can have very positive impacts. And I've had some good conversations with viewers about that, where maybe the story feels bad in the moment, but can lead to positive results and staying on top of it. And I think that's crucial.
Thanks for that. I'm getting the current call here from Jim also. I would like to give Tripp and Ashley a quick moment if we want to put a final point on that, as far as why people should agree with the relations.
Well, when folks offer that criticism, that response, I ask, well, where do you get your news? What would you like to see in your news? Here's some of what I or my colleagues have done lately, and like Amanda said, just try to have a conversation about it. And I will say this: those hard-hitting stories about accountability, stories about crime, people read them. We know with all the technology that we have now, I can tell you how many people looked at any single article. I can tell you how much time people spent on that page, and I can tell you that people read it. They do, and so. Part of that is like thinking, are we telling the whole story? Are we holding people accountable? And, if we're doing our job well, then hopefully our readers and viewers are served by that.
I'm just going to say quickly, it's okay to disagree. It's okay not to like last night's news. Try tonight. It might be better for you. That's what I always say, what do you like? And I use it, as a way to say, what do you want to hear? What do you want to see? What is your favorite newscast by chance, if you have one? It's, again, it's a sample that you can't, you take it seriously and you try to engage and say, we do a lot of different things. I hope something in there you like, but it's not going to change. It's going to always be people who don't like the news or don't like the measure of your news or the subject of your news, or it's too much about that, or it's this or that. That's never going to change. You just got to keep following the story and go with it. And over time, you'll find out what they like and don't like about it. We'll find that out.
From a guy who did a decade sentence. I'm going to hand it over to Jim now so we can wrap things up.
Have a little thank you, sir.
He's got a note.
So, we have a round of applause for our fine. What a constructive discussion, and thank you all for taking time out of your evenings to be here tonight. This is the first time we've had a Newsmaker at night of this format. You'll probably get an email survey asking what you thought of the format, what you thought about having it at this time. Please respond to that. This is all kind of an experiment as far as having events at times where we meet people when they would like to gather. So once again, we'd like to thank the event sponsors, all of them. We can already thank them, but we also want to thank our hosts, the Newsroom Pub, and the Safe House and Marcus Corporation, who is our landlord here. See Joette Richards for applications to join the Press Club. Joette is our executive director. Thursday night, we'll be back here, many of us, for Meet the Media, which is one of our really fun events. It's celebrity bartenders for very short shifts. Don't ask for complicated drinks. And it's really a lot of fun, and it's a big mixer. Tuesday, December 13th, we've got a Newsmaker luncheon with County Executive David Crowley. And Thursday, January 26th, be there. The city's 177th annual birthday party at the Grain Exchange. That's a really fun event too, so we hope that all of you can make it. Thank you again for coming.